most of us, we acknowledge 2020 as the worst year in history, a worst year of our history, worst year of our own personal history. And it's very, it feels like as if more was lost than gained, which may be very, very true. But can we focus on what we have achieved? Because like resilience science shows that if you're able to acknowledge, especially if you've gone through something very stressful and trying, that you've managed to come on the other side, being able to really not discount the positive things that did come out of a crisis moment is very important.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Answering Legal's Everything Except the Law podcast. As always, I am your host, Nick Worker. If this is your first time tuning in, this is the podcast where we share expert advice on all the parts of running a law firm that attorneys weren't exactly trained for back in law school. Now, today, I am very excited to learn from today's guest. She is a doctor of psychology and an executive coach with the New York City litigation firm Harris, St. Laurent, and Wechsler. I hope I said St. Laurent right. I really try with my pronunciation. She has 20 years of experience working with individuals involved in high stakes and emotionally charged litigation, and joins us today to offer guidance on how law firms can best handle the transition into a post-COVID world. Dr. Monica Delgado, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Nick. It's a real pleasure to be here. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's Friday. It's early in the morning. I'm well caffeinated, and I get to talk to interesting people for a living. So, I feel blessed in that regard, right?
Day.
So for our listeners, can you give us some background information on yourself? Tell us a little bit about your role at Harris and, well, I'm really trying. Harris, St. Laurent, and Wechsler.
Perfect. Perfect. Andrew will be happy to know finally someone he can pronounce his name properly. We all botch it up. I'm born and raised in Southern California, Ph.D. in multicultural psychology. Did a lot of training with PTSD and neuropsychology, and then just expanded my work from there. And originally I was focused on pediatric neuropsych, because who doesn't want to help, hurt babies? And ended up getting pulled into forensic criminal psychology. It wasn't something I had planned, and dove straight into the deep end in helping people be able to understand mitigation factors and psychological factors as they pertain to criminal defense or criminal cases, I should say. And then I moved up to doing a lot of death penalty cases to be able to, so all the way from the minute the person got, indicted, all the way to trial. So I did a lot of work also with program development and community development from a micro level, helping cities and stuff like that. So anything that has to do with human behavior, anything that has to do with people and how people just don't, everybody trying to adjust has been something I've worked on for a very long time.
That's so interesting. So I want to ask you so many questions about that, but I have to stay on topic. So
we can come back to it.
Yeah, we'll come back. So what are some of the biggest things that you've seen those who are working at law firms struggle with since the pandemic began? Because obviously, a lot about human behavior. And it was definitely, like, I could name reasons for myself why it was difficult, but why would those who work at law firms be struggling differently, and what were they struggling with?
I think, they were struggling just to get back to their life, back to their agenda, back to what, right? And when I mean agenda, their calendar, right? Because people are very proactive, very responsible and meeting their deadlines and just living their life. So it was just that, when can we come back, especially in the beginning, right? In the beginning, it's all about, hurry up, let's get back. But then as people started to get a little more settled and a bit comfortable with being able to be at home in their PJs and, and just wear a shirt while you're on a Zoom meeting and learning some of that, then it became the transition out of isolation and back into the office. So those have been the factors I've seen as far as, just trying to get used to all this, what's going on since 2020.
I know for me, because I liked working from home. I didn't mind it. And the prospect of working from home before the pandemic was always something that I was very hopeful for. I
Mm-hmm.
wished, or I thought I would work and negotiate, on a yearly basis. Like, can I work 1 day from home? Can I work 2 days from home? But when I was forced to work from home,
Mm-hmm.
the thing was really the uncertainty. Is the
Mm-hmm.
business going to last? Am I going to be out of a job? How long is this going to last? Is this a forever type of thing? And a lot of fear, I think, was, really what bothered me the most about working from home. But other than that, yeah, I had my dog. Sometimes I take the laptop into the backyard, sit in the sunshine. Um, so yeah, I don't think the working from home for me, and maybe for some people, maybe people don't like working from home, but I don't see that as the big issue. You're right. It's when can we get back to normal? It's this
Mm-hmm.
yearning for the normal. So
Mm-hmm.
there were a lot of lawyers who had their own way of doing things for years, and they obviously had to make big changes to their working life since COVID. What's been your advice to attorneys about embracing these changes, like working from a different location or adopting new and unusual technology?
Oh, being very open-minded. I think even the most successful, most skilled attorney, has a team around them to help them get, if they imagine themselves in court or in front of a judge, it takes people to help get them up there. And the same thing goes today. It may be that the assistant is a virtual assistant. It may be that there's some software or some technology. And that's can be a bit overwhelming, especially when there's, as you mentioned, the way in which you earn an income has been compromised. Stress at home because you may not have a working environment that you set up there beforehand. All of a sudden, friends are getting sick and people are dying. So there's like a whole life or death thing kind of going on in your mind. And who wants to suddenly learn or join in on a Zoom session to learn which button to press and, how to look right or look professional. So I think that one is having really cognitive flexibility and knowing that there's going to be some bumps in the road, and also learning how to reach out to your support team, I think, is vital.
So you mentioned open-mindedness. I try to keep an open mind, right? But I'm human. There are things that I hear that I'm like, never, I just write it
Mm-hmm.
off.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious because obviously you would know. Is there a way that you can talk to people to get them to be more open-minded? Are there like exercises, or I'm curious.
There definitely are, right? And that was part of what, I mentioned a little bit of some techniques or some advice in in the article that I wrote. Because if you have a mind that is stable, right, that is really kind of grounded, and mostly with yourself, right? You're true to yourself. Even if you're having to present an argument that may be very different to what you personally believe, if you're grounded in knowing that what you're doing is based on good values, it's based on who you are, you're delivering your best work product, then what happens is that helps the brain to be able to be more open-minded and to be more flexible. But in what we saw over almost 2 years now, right? If we count all of last year and now the part of this year, it's very challenging to do that when there's so much stuff that's uncertain. In the field that I'm in, people come to talk to you. If it's outside of a forensic example, people come to talk to you because things no longer make sense. Everything that they've tried to do in the past isn't working, and they've really hit rock bottom. When I used to walk in as a consultant on a death penalty case, people would be like, "Oh, it's so nice to meet you." And I'm like, really, my being here is not a good thing because you're facing the death penalty. That's the only reason I'm here. So we need to be able to consolidate, basically kind of separate yourself a little bit from all of that stress that's going on around you and be able to be focused so that you can take information in and know how to respond back appropriately and efficiently.
That's so interesting because, so I'm going to go off topic. So not that this is like a happy subject at all, but what is it that you could offer somebody who's on the who's facing the death penalty, really? What happens when you go in there and you consult with them?
So in those cases, what happened is that because the Supreme Court has a standard that, there's a whole bunch of mitigating factors that need to be investigated. There's a lot of psychological factors that need to be understood going back 3 generations. So yeah, so my role was to write that history, to go and find all the data that a judge could depend on to make a proper, decision. And so what happens is that it's not that I'm going in there to be a therapist. What I'm going in there for is to use, my expertise in being able to take apart someone's life history and be able to try to have it make sense in the midst of the chaos. And what you do is you help advise, I help advise attorneys to be able to recognize, look, here we have faulty data regarding, testing. Here we have some medical records in which I can see here where the trajectory towards the nexus was already headed that way, maybe. So there's a lot of stuff that I can see, just like they see from their expertise that I don't recognize in that way. That's what I do, and then help them be able to take that data, if it applies to, the charges and all of that, meets the standard of evidence, for them to be able to discuss it and explain it properly to a judge so that a judge has all the information.
So you basically make this person's life trajectory make sense, even 3 generations back. You establish a pattern. That's incredible. Wow. I have to go one more off topic. One more.
Of course.
Can you tell me one of the most interesting stories you have in that regard?
We could be here forever. Okay, we really could. That's one of the things. And it's sad because we're talking about really terrible circumstances, right? But they were all filled with drama, all filled with really, really. I think one of the best, or one example that I'd like to give, which started how I met the founder of Harris, St. Laurent and Wechsler, is, Jonathan Harris, when he called me because they were representing somebody facing clemency. So he had exhausted all rights for his death penalty, and now they're at the last straw.
Wow.
And so getting called in October when an execution date was scheduled for December 18th was like a big deal, right? All of a sudden I get called and it's like, can you please come and help us get some information so we can reach out to, the victim's family members, because nobody's heard from them. And so that's something that I also do. So it was being able to find the widow of a victim that the accused, had been attached to, and speaking to her, and then having her be able to say, look, nobody's asked me my opinion of what I thought. Nobody's come and reached out to me. I haven't had any contact whatsoever. It was an old case that was done, in the 80s. And I really would like people to know that, they're not killing him for me. I don't need that man killed in order to have some sense of closure over the loss of my husband. And so to be able to help somebody like that, be able to have her voice be actually printed in the front page of the paper, just as, my partner's about to go in and speak to the governor and tell him what the victims really want. And so it was really, one of those moments before we depended so much on email and texting, where all of a sudden I'm like, we're sending you the information, and John was right there, to pick up the letter, be able to see the newspaper article. And so that was a big deal. And that was what was the beginning of my relationship with him that led me to now be part of the firm.
Wow. It's such an intense topic because there's obviously a lot of I would say, moving parts, to put it mildly. So yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say one of the things about that experience, which is an experience that, of course, for me became very familiar because I kept doing, these types of cases and kept working with these types of high charged environments, was that you had to really stay grounded in what you were doing right then and there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you fast forward us to, what we were going to talk about today, about the today normal, it was like vital. In a case like the one I described with the clemency, we had a lot of media, we had a lot of celebrities, we had so many people that decided that they wanted to get their piece of this for whatever reasons, they each had. And, okay, that's your thing, but our job was to focus on what we had to do. And, that can be really crazy making when you have death on the table, when you have all these people like really going to war against you. And then also the team itself feeling tremendous amount of stress because, all of a sudden they start questioning their own values and what they're doing there, and they're tired and blah, 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 blah. But you stay very grounded in why you're there. What brought me there? How can I do the best job I possibly can? And so that's part of like what went into, I didn't know that, this part of what went into this perspective here is that, staying very grounded in the present, you make an assessment as to where you're going, like what's coming next. An example like this, and also with COVID, excuse me, how much risk am I taking? How much, what are we doing going forward? And what have we gone through just recently? For the purpose of, that's really, really great, because the brain then is like, oh, you're listening to me. I'm like stressed out over here about this stuff. And by doing a real simple assessment like that, the brain can get really very stable. And then the person is able to go to have that cognitive flexibility that I mentioned earlier. Right. So they have more tools and access to their tools.
So you mentioned today normal, right? And I know that you've been encouraging those working in law these days to use the phrase today normal. Can you tell us a bit about what that means?
So, COVID happened, lockdown happened, right? And we started to hear everybody talking about, is this the new normal? Is this normal? Right? We heard a lot about that. When is this going to be over? I want to get back to my normal life. So that was going on a lot. And I could even feel it myself, the desire to be able to return to that, right? Everything about me, my body, my brain wanted to go out, go live my life. Then I get out there and I'm like, what the heck? This is not what I left. Things are different. Even seeing somebody that is familiar to me, all of a sudden they're apprehensive to come near me. It was all the signals that most people don't want. If they've formed relationships, if they have, sense of connection with others, and if their own self-identity, right, depends on all of this. So as we then started to move through COVID and the news started coming out and everything was just so different, state by state, right, country by country, and, the world is so small, it became impossible, because how are you going to know what's going to really be the standard when the standards of our normal standard have been in existence for decades, right? We've taken them for granted how long it's gotten there. So this was a way to be able to recognize that I understand that things are crazy, a little bit, mixed up, but for the moment you're awake, you're able to go on to tackle the day. How can you focus on the present moment for the purpose of being proactive, to be able to feel as if you're contributing towards your life goals? Being successful for many people is an easier way to just describe it. How can you do that amongst all of this? And so that was where the idea of this came up, that today normal is just that, right? It's not the tomorrow normal. It's not the yesterday normal. It ends at, 12:01 tonight, right? And I got to start all over again. That may not feel good to think that, oh, here we go again. But what it does is it helps the brain focus on a time period that then the commitment is there, that you know that when you wake up in the morning, we're going to do this again, building on what we accomplished the day before. I hope I answered that right.
No, you definitely did. I'm curious, do you have some, I'm going to say, recommendations on ways that lawyers can go about embracing this type of mindset about today normal?
Well, in the art, my recommendation would be, from the minute you open your eyes, for instance, to just give yourself a moment to kind of get in the zone, right? I have a bad habit. Many of my colleagues have the same habit of, reaching then for whatever gadget we're now so used to being in our hand all the time, right? Wanting to check, it doesn't even make sense, right? It's like, give myself a little bit of time. So, it really came to me when I was watching Formula One, and I was watching them. And so I was watching the mannerisms of the drivers, right? And as you see the drivers, as they go to get into the car, there's a lot about their composure that starts to change, right? Because they're really getting ready, because in a few seconds, the light's going to go off and it's on. And it was just amazing to just see the calmness just kind of come over them. And I thought to myself, what do I do to be in the zone? What do I do if opening the door and going outside is the green light to go deal with business? What do I do to make sure that I'm prepared? So one thing I thought of, really taking a moment in the morning to wake up and, okay, I'm here, all body parts working as well as we can, depending on your age or whatever, right? Some things, aches and pains as you get older, but how can I focus so that by the time I walk out of here, I'm like, at least have given myself, a nice amount of time to be able to present the best self that I can. So that was one of the ideas. The other one was, you can like really kind of talk yourself into being focused on the fact that you have lived through something that has been very stressful. Most of us, we acknowledge 2020 as the worst year in history, a worst year of our history, worst year of our own personal history. And it's very, it feels like as if more was lost than gained, which may be very, very true. But can we focus on what we have achieved? Because like resilience science shows that if you're able to acknowledge, especially if you've gone through something very stressful and trying, that you've managed to come on the other side. So if you can just acknowledge, just through the acknowledgement of like, wow, like a person personally has gone through some major challenges and I've managed to still be here. I may have a new job, but I'm able to take care of myself, right? Maybe new relationships have developed or change a relationship. So being able to really not discount the positive things that did come out of a crisis moment is very important, because what that does is as soon as you even think about something positive that fed you, the brain starts to work, right? The body starts to feel a little differently, right? You start to notice something inside of you. And so that process itself is very important, because it tells you a lot about where you are in the world and who you are. And so, that's something that I really recommend. It's almost, as if you take like a little bit of step outside of yourself and just kind of observe yourself for the purpose of making sure that, again, that you're presenting the most successful best self of who you are.
We will be right back with the show after this short message.
My name is Brian Perskin. I'm the managing partner of Brian D. Perskin Associates, PC. I started out with Answering Legal, and now my practice has grown tenfold. The biggest benefit to Answering Legal is my phones are answered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because the lifeblood of any law firm are new clients. Answering Legal is an extension of my firm. I feel that every receptionist at Answering Legal works for me. It allows lawyers and paralegals to actually work without answering the phone. Anytime I leave this office, I know my business is still running. I would recommend it to any lawyer that wants to make their lives easier. You need Answering Legal.
Something that you were mentioning reminded me of, so I practice meditation.
Yes.
I like to practice mindfulness. And something that I have learned in meditation is I first got into meditation because I have anxiety, right? And the problem with anxiety is that you really believe your thoughts. So like the racing thoughts will come and they present to you as facts and you believe them. So I had to change my mindset from, okay, well, I always believe my thoughts. So why don't I tell myself good things, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of like you got to practice it, right? But if you can begin to positively affirm certain things, they present to you as facts in your head, it becomes more habitual. And that I just know from experience has worked for me. But when I talk to people, I like to, in order to make sure I understand, I have to like kind of say things back so that like cognitively I can make sure I understand. So if I make no sense to you, at least it made a little bit of sense to me, I hope.
No, that totally makes sense. You know, meditation is such, you know, it's a hugely, for some people, undervalued, right? Discipline, and it's amazing. I mean, meditation is so healthy, very, very healthy for the brain, very healthy for the whole body. I mean, I've been able to work with people that do meditation or work with different types of breathing exercises for the purpose of being centered. And you can change. I mean, I remember being, you know, when I did like my postdoc or pre-doc hours at the hospital, you know, having somebody connected to a functional MRI and talking him through, you know, just let's take a deep breath, you know, just listen to my voice. And I would talk to him like this through the microphone. And as soon as he'd hear, you could see how the brain start to just, fire up. It was just really amazing. And the person was just like, look, here was a person that suffered from being claustrophobic, and he's going into this little tube, and we were able to do that. So meditation is exceptionally good thing to practice. Some people think that it requires, the more you practice it, you better you are at anything. But even if you just start out with a few seconds a day and just kind of build on that, you'll start to find results. It's fabulous.
So in the beginning, I would meditate for, I don't know, a minute, and then it would work into 5 minutes. And the most I can really do is like 20 before I come out of it. And like during the meditation, I'll be doing an exercise with something and I'll be like, okay, come on, like, let's do this. Let's go to bed. Let's shut this off. And then you got to like force yourself to sit through it kind of. But it is like exercise. You know, you don't go to a gym and have like a plotted out exercise thing and be like, I'm not going to do that last part. No, you finish it up, even if it hurts and you don't want to do it anymore and you're hungry. Because then you know that afterwards you can go do other things.
You go ahead. I mean, and that's one of the things, like for attorneys, you know, a lot of times you see them as they're getting ready, right, before the judge walks in, you know, they're each into their own notebooks, like maybe getting their stuff ready, just getting themselves really centered in their little piece of real estate for that experience, right? This is where I am. And I notice them, you know, they'll take deep breaths or start looking around, making sure their comfort foods and all the stuff that they need are close by. So being able to be centered is like something that's very vital to anybody that's needing to present an argument that is going to be, you know, torn apart and judged. Very, very important place to start.
I could talk about this all day with you. But I do want to talk about like management. And I'm someone who I've been managing people only for a few years. but by nature, I'm a caring person. Like I care about the people that I work with. So, and I didn't really know this because this was all uncharted territory for everybody. And I'm not like a behavioral psychologist. I'm just, I like to think of myself as a nice dude. That's what I am. So for me, it was really important to check in on the people that I cared about during the pandemic. It was very important to check in on my colleagues, whether they wanted to talk about it or not. You know, some people have different things going on, and you don't pry, but you just make sure that they know that you're there and you're willing to listen. So I'm curious, from your perspective, and the reasoning behind it is, how important is it for people who are running and managing law firms to be checking in with their staff to see how they're managing during these uncertain times?
Well, I think it's like any management 101 book would tell you, check in with your staff frequently, right? Even prior to COVID. That's a skill that is, you know, really very necessary, I think. When you have a life or death experience like what we've gone through, that just raised the ante a little bit more. And I think one thing is recognizing that there's diversity within your staff, and there'll be some staff members that may present as if being just fine and might be suffering or might be having difficulty adjusting in private. So it's good to know, to have a good relationship with your people so that you can tell, you know, where you may be intruding, if it's outside of the business scope, you know. But the one thing that we saw about the pandemic was that boundaries got blurred to some degree, right? And it was in how do you say it? I'm bilingual, so sometimes I start wanting to say stuff in Spanish, excuse me. You know, when boundaries get blurred, what happens is that then the guy that was just your boss didn't really ask you much, is now asking a little bit more. And that was very appropriate considering the circumstances. I think in COVID, a lot of people showed that they were able to continue to have this dialogue with their staff about how are you doing, what's going on at home, you know, because they're wanting to make assessments as to, you know, when are people going to start coming back into the office? You know, how's Nick doing at home working on his stuff? Do I see anything going on where I might be able to help him? So I think that, as I said, you know, we talk business always talks about having good communication with your team, right? And that varies depending on the culture within any office or organization. Everybody has a different way of reaching out to each other. And so I think it was very important here for people to really know where everybody was at emotionally. And then also for those that were, you know, having some stress symptoms for a period of time, is, you know, to sit down and talk to them or figure out how that they could better support the people is super important.
I always say that there's like that old adage, right, that you can't buy loyalty.
Right.
And I just disagree. I think you can absolutely buy loyalty. It might not be with, you know, the monetary currency, or it might be, but you can absolutely earn and buy loyalty. And for different people, that means different things. And for managers, it just means connecting with people how they need to be connected with. Some people appreciate it if you stay out of their business. Some people just like it if you're there. I have a friend who, he doesn't like to open up. He's not an emotional guy. He doesn't like to tell you what's going on. But if he's going through a tough time, just wants you in the room. Sit there, be quiet. We can watch TV, you know, order a pizza, and that's it. New York, we order pizza.
Good ones too.
Right. So I think that is such an important concept to carry over in other areas. And I know that one of the things that you emphasize to law firms is that you want to invest in the trust of your clients. So, and even if you think you already have it, right? Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about what this means and how you can do it, and sort of not only why it's important, but like how it can take you a step further?
2020 highlighted suspiciousness to a degree that I think most of us had never really collectively all come together about, right? In the legal field, you're always suspicious about the other side a little bit, right? You always have that kind of aspect, present in your work. Take that into like a huge global scale, and now we don't know what to believe at all. I felt suspicious about so many things. Maybe I should go to the location, see if there's actually that going on that I see on this, screen here. To that degree, it felt. So what happened was that, we saw a lot of divide also between people, and not being able, all of a sudden, close relationships were even questioning what someone was telling them, because again, it didn't support what somebody had just watched, on their computer screen. So everybody was just really feeling, doubtful and doubting the credibility of what was coming at them. So I noticed that, like, the more that I just continued to follow through with being me and being trustworthy and really kind of being present, that made a huge difference, because in the whole cloud of confusion, all of a sudden, I'm the person that someone may not agree with, but she was willing to be honest with me. She followed through with what she said. And I know that I could pick up the phone and call her, at any time, and she'll grab the phone, right? And so going back and demonstrating to somebody that you're not taking them for granted, in the small way of just following through with, calling them when you said that you would, or getting them that answer when you said that you would. If you think that, if you approach it that way, like if I say to you, okay, Nick, I'll call you later today and I'll make sure I have, all of that discovery for you all reviewed and ready to go. And then it comes, 2:00, and I realize I'm not going to be able to meet the promise. Get on the phone and call you, let you know, like, there's been an adjustment to what it is that I promised, and I need to, like, basically renegotiate it with you, so that you understand that it's not that I took off and, went, bird watching or something for a little while, but I was actually working on it, and you're important, and I'm coming back to you, to make sure that you understand that I'm doing what I promised. And so, I think that, being in the pandemic, a lot of people started looking at the things in which what they were taking for granted, what they weren't acknowledging, right? And so this is a way to kind of like demonstrate to the people in this relationship that you're committed to it, and that you're doing something, even if it means that you're changing it, even if it means that you're transitioning out, but your word is gold. And any attorney that lives by that, any professional actually, right? People just always really appreciate, how attentive they are, how real they are. And that takes you very, very far in life, very, very far, in my opinion.
I never feel disingenuous talking about this, because I truly believe this, right? Is making anybody, whether it's a business relationship or a friend or anything, making somebody feel important is something that really helps you earn that person's trust, right? So especially from a business perspective, you're right. Personal accountability matters a lot. If you don't call a person back, well, then they know, right? Or they glean from that action that you don't value their time, and that you're really indifferent about their business. So it's just, to me, it's a little bit self-validating that I work for a company that really connects people to law firms. And the law firms that use us are often more successful because they actually care that the people calling them speak to a person who is a representative of the firm, not a voicemail where I'll call you back and blah, 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 blah. Because I can tell you from experience that anybody who is willing to pay to cater to their customers by having a real professional receptionist, such as one from my service, is also someone who calls people back and has personal accountability and communicates with their customers. And that is ultimately why they are successful, because I don't think that any lawyer can really make the argument that their results are so much better than other competitors when it comes to any, we all follow the same laws. We all have the same procedures and everything. But what people really want is an excellent experience getting there. So
even if it's bumpy going down the road.
Exactly.
Right.
There can be obstacles, there can be bumps in the road, but as long as you're communicated with and you feel like a part of the process and you're brought along with for the ride, you're ultimately going to come out of that experience feeling positively about it. So I want to talk about, just because I see this being more of an important thing, especially we were having these conversations about mental health. It felt like for like the last 5 years. And then we got to the pandemic where everybody really got isolated and mental health became even more important. So I see this getting implemented. I'm curious on your opinion. So do you think more firms are going to seek input from mental health experts like yourself? And how valuable do you think that will be to the profession as a whole?
I think that psychology and law have, crossed some time ago, right? Like in my case, it's been a long time where a psychologist has played a role. Different aspects of law, people didn't think for a while. They used to say, well, how is it that a criminal forensic psychologist is going to be working, with business cases? It's like, it's not the same thing. I'm like, really? Really? Like, I didn't have a case, a criminal case in which two partners weren't able to sit down and, work out their disagreement. Wow. And now all of a sudden one's buried and the other one's driving to some country to get as far away from what he just did. That started as a business problem. Yep. You know what I mean? So, human emotion just crosses over all aspects of everything. I mean, we show up. I think that a lot of popular shows, people tell me that there's some shows that now they always had. I remember when I was working before, people used to be like, Monica, have you watched The Sopranos? You're the psychologist.
It's hilarious.
I was like, I hadn't even seen it then.
That's very funny.
So we've been there. We're usually in the background. We're usually, in my case, I think, let me go back to your question. I'm sorry. Because unlike you, we can just go all over the place. So yes, I think that our culture, especially with what's happened, people will find that reaching out to people that have experience with understanding psychological issues, emotional trauma, how the body responds to it, they are going to call them. This is different, right? Because I'm not coming in being, it's not like when you come to see me for a clinical hour. This is different. This is really, you're moving. It's like a blend of everything like I've learned over the years. I practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, love the whole culture of what BJJ is, competed. It's just an amazing aspect of my life. And I find that doing this type of work when you're working in a law firm really kind of resembles like the BJJ practice, right? In that you just show up. And so this is where you want to make sure that the people that are working, that you're looking for help with, it's like in law, we have psychologists that all specialize in a whole bunch of different things. We're not just like all the same, right? And so I think that, I think lawyers are really becoming very savvy to knowing that they can reach out to people like myself and even other type of helping professionals. And I think that is going to grow over time.
That is so interesting. And Next time, now I feel like Joe Rogan. Now I got like a fighter on the podcast, and I'm talking to somebody who's trained in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So that's a checkbox for me. I got a fighter on the podcast.
Regrettably, you didn't get Gordon Ryan, who is like, right, the GOAT of BJJ right now, but
or like who just fought Poirier. I'm thinking UFC because I'm thinking who I just saw Joe Rogan with.
Or Mackenzie Dern, who's an amazing, shout out to one of the female UFC fighters, an amazing person. I think it's like you're saying, I mean, BJJ is one of the things where you really take the area of your life that you might feel that you are weaker in and try to use that as a way to try to get yourself out of a bind. So it's a really great way for the mind also to be stuck in something. I mean, I remember, really getting pinned down by somebody, and she was bigger than I was. And there I was, smashed underneath somebody, and I didn't like it. I was like, this is not going to happen again. And to calm yourself down, which is similar to what I mentioned in the article about witnessing yourself, right? Calm the mind down. In this thing, it was sparring only. There wasn't a circle of people around me where I was going to find myself, in a really life-threatening situation. But calm the mind down so you can observe yourself, so that you can actually look and see what is the predicament you're actually physically in. And then so that the emotions don't then put a lens by which you then might, misinterpret what's happening. The point is focus and then work yourself out of that dilemma.
That's such a good metaphor for like life in general, is because physically you're pinned down, right? But you have to not panic, use your, which is an emotion, right? And you look around and you assess the situation. Okay, what have I learned about being in this position before? What do I know that I can do, rather than just act on emotion and fly off the handle? So I would just like to thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Delgado, for joining me on the show today. And thank you to all our listeners. We hope you enjoyed this conversation, and we will be back with another episode of Everything Except the Law soon. Be sure to check out previous episodes of our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and the Answering Legal YouTube channel. See you next time, everyone.